so much, Evans. And thank you all for this opportunity and the invitation. It's an honor and privilege to be here to talk with you about what I would argue is one of the most important issues facing this community, and that's public education. With me here today are my colleagues, Ron Kaler, who is the Assistant Superintendent over Communications of Kent ISD, and I probably missed part of your title there, Ron. Ron plays a real right-hand role to the superintendent of the ISD, Kevin Konarska. And then also with me is Elizabeth Likens, who is a school board member over at Eastern Rapids Public Schools, chair of the Friends of Kent County Schools, co-chair, excuse me, and just an all-around advocate for children in public education. So why don't you all come on over here. We were sent a list of questions and things, so we thought we'd kind of tag team and go through and answer the questions that were provided in advance. We'll keep this open, so ask questions throughout this process as you see fit. And you know, some of the questions are a little bit more for Ron, a little bit more for me, a little bit more for Liz. So we'll just kind of roll through it. One of the things that I thought would be good to start with, because I think there's always the question about how are our schools funded? And is it enough? And where are we today? And if we were to change things, what would we do better? What would we do different? And so to start the conversation, I thought it would be good for Elizabeth to kind of help answer one of the questions. The question here, there was actually a couple of them, but it asked about, can we explain, or do we have a chart showing the various methods used to fund education in Michigan? And the other part was a question that says, some studies indicate Michigan is funding public education better than we have in the past. Now, I don't know where that study came from, because that is just not accurate. You know, depending on how they look at it, you can always, studies can be made to say various things. But as Elizabeth will share, and I know I will echo as well on, you know, we are funding at the levels back at around the 2004 level right now. If you look at where we were with funding for schools, we're at 2004 level. So last I checked, it's 2014. So we're about 10 years behind where we should be. So Elizabeth, I'm going to hand this over to you. You want to tee up the chart?
Sure. Thank you, John. Thanks everyone for having me. Really, so excited to be involved and invited. You are such an active, amazing group of people. So thank you for all you do. What I put together here, just by way of background, I'm sorry my iPad's not totally cooperating to expand, but this will still give you the idea. I have a cohort named Christy Ramsey, who she and I work through the Kent ISD grassroots group, and we have a kind of traveling roadshow that she and I do together. We've met with probably 20 districts so far, getting parents activated to understand what's happening in schools and why, and what they can do. And so I pulled together just a few slides from what is otherwise a much longer presentation. But this is one of the first slides we show everyone. This is what we call the school aid fund. Sometimes you'll hear SAF, school aid fund, you'll hear the grant money. This is the pot of money we divide up. So when you talk about count day, number of kids in seats, this is the pot of money that gets divided by the number of students in the state. Some of you, if you lived in Michigan in 1994, remember Proposal A, and that is totally revamped how school funding works. So when you went to school, or your children went to school, everything was funded locally through millages. If the school district wanted to add a new foreign language requirement or something new, they went out to the local voters to ask for that. What had happened was there was a huge disparity in funding. Some districts were spending maybe $2,000 per child, others were maybe spending $10,000 per child. So two things were happening back in the early 90s across the United States, frankly. There were converging things. There were very high property taxes in the upper Midwest. I mean, let's face it, they were very, very high here. So people were starting to get concerned about that. Additionally, there were a lot of arguments and lawsuits happening about equity in education. So those two forces converged together in 1994, and what basically came out of it was Proposal A. We basically now take our money and put it all in a pot in Lansing. Oops, sorry guys. And that is that pot that was up there. So, what's important to recognize, and I'll pop up in a minute, is that that pot is made up of a whole bunch of different funding sources. So the sales tax is that huge green portion. And that is, in 1994, our sales tax was one of the lowest in the nation. We were at 4%. We raised it to 6%. Obviously, when the economy gets bad, people buy less stuff. So that pool shrinks, so there's less money in the school aid fund. Additionally, we have largely moved to a service-based economy. So we can debate the merits of whether or not movie tickets or entertainment tickets should be taxed or not. That's a different policy discussion, but the reality is that's not money that's come, there's no tax there, so that doesn't come into the school refund. I want to address the lottery. A lot of people say, what about the lottery? Isn't this paying for the schools? It does. There's that third little slice there. That's the lottery. So you can see it doesn't stretch real far.
Which one? What color?
It's like next to the yellow. One to the right of the yellow is the lottery.
Wow.
So, and then there's a bunch of other little ones. Tobacco. There's a bunch of other little funky taxes, and I've got another slide I'll show you later where we take a lot of little bites that are going to impact this pie. So that's okay. And really quick, then I want to move to Proposal A. So Proposal A raised sales tax from 4 to 6%. It also, if you know about your homesteading, your property is homesteaded. That's great for you as a property owner. I mean, it's a great deal. But it does cap how much property tax can be captured, which is, I think that's not a bad policy, but it does impact how much money goes into the school aid fund as a result. So we just have to know that everything has a cost. The big thing about Proposal A is that district no longer can go out and ask for a bond or a millage or anything to use for operations. We cannot pay teacher salaries. We cannot pay for art and music. We cannot do any of that locally anymore. We can go out for a bond to renovate our buildings, which many districts are doing this cycle. So that's just important to realize. A lot of people will say, oh my gosh, well, my tax bill, I've got all this stuff on it. I'm like, well, right, that's helping pay off our natatorium or our performing arts center, all the things our community needs and benefits from, but that cannot go towards teacher salaries. You have to understand that. So that's the baby basics that I think is important to understand before we have the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, why don't I add a couple things to that?
Use the mic.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Got it? All right. Why, the perception that we may be spending more on education than we were spending earlier. Well, there are a couple reasons for that. One is that we're spending a lot of our state money. What she just explained. You can have somebody come up and show you a chart that will say Michigan spends more of Michigan state revenues on education than other states. In fact, we're about 14th in the country because we have a unique funding formula and all of our money comes from the state. As you just described, throw it in a pot, send it back. Okay, that said, we're 41st in the nation in the amount of money per pupil from all sources, state, local, and federal. 41st. There are many states, every Great Lakes state, for example, the exception of Ohio is sort of right around us, spends more money on education than we do. There are a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is because they have the older tax model and their communities can decide to spend more money for education because they would like more for their children. We don't have that opportunity. As Elizabeth said, we can come to you and we can say, your children need this, or grandchildren need this facility. Will you help us create that for them? And you can say yes or no, I think they need that or not. But we can't come to you, as she said, and say, we would like to have a Chinese immersion program. Will you help us make that available to your children or grandchildren? So I think that's something that's important to know. The other thing is, you're going to ask, why is it so expensive? Well, by definition, it's a people-intensive business. The absolute best piece of instructional equipment is still a teacher, a human who we want to earn a living wage and contribute to our community in many ways. And the other thing is this. Unlike when all of you went to school, every student today has to have some type of post-secondary experience to have a living wage and to be able to support a family. Very few high school graduates without post-secondary experience. That can be some kind of certification, that can be a community college degree, or that can be a four-year degree, but without some type of additional after high school experience for specialized training, it's almost impossible to get a job that will pay you a wage that can support a family. And so we're used to a high school degree without advanced math, a high school degree without significant science, a high school degree that didn't prepare you for anything except to get out and work in the lumber yard. That was fine. That was a middle-class job. You were good. That's not sufficient today. Those jobs don't exist in a manner that you can support a family. And I think we all want our graduates to be able to support a family. And so we're working harder than we ever did to raise the bar, and every succeeding class is the best educated class we've ever had in this state because of the increased rigor. We still have more to do, there's no doubt about that. But that's some of the reason why education is so expensive.
Thanks, Ron. So another question that came up was, why should education be a topic of interest for seniors? And I think we're probably all going to have something to say about this one. You know, I think the most basic answer, of course, is just that we owe this to our community's children. And I think each and every individual, every adult in society, regardless of age, that we need to be working to ensure that our children and our grandchildren have a better life than what we've had. And we should strive to support them and ensure that they are contributing citizens to our community and that they are properly educated so they're prepared for when they get out of high school. They're ready for the real world. They're ready to move on and raise a family and make a career and hopefully retire and enjoy life. And but beyond just that issue of doing what's right, doing what we have, what I believe a civic and moral obligation to do is to support our children and ensure they have a proper education. It goes beyond that, and in this new kind of global economy, there's a lot of talk about the impact of education and our global competitiveness as a city, as a region, as a state, and as a country. That in years ago, America topped the list. We were the best of the best in the world when it came to education. I think we're now like 41st on a national scale or an international scale of how educated our children are. So looking at it from an economic development issue, economic competitive issue, we all have a vested interest in seeing a strong, healthy, vibrant public education system. From a workforce development, again, we need to ensure that our children are prepared. And it's not just, as Ron had said, kind of the days-old jobs where students could get out of high school and go work in the auto factory. That just doesn't cut it anymore. And so we have a vested interest in ensuring we have the highest quality, most skilled and educated workforce so as our children will compete on that global scale. I think it's also a quality of life issue. Having strong schools, well-educated society is going to contribute to the quality of life in our neighborhoods and in our communities. And so I think this is the reason why for seniors, for really any adults, for individual taxpayers in this community in and around West Michigan, we have a vested interest in our schools. And it's a smart investment, one that will pay dividends, and one that will help to ensure that our children and grandchildren succeed in life. I'm going to give it to Liz. She's got the soft touch.
Thanks. John and I have the pleasure of speaking together fairly regularly these days. Democracy, folks. I know that sounds so wonky and political, but the reality is you will not have a functioning democracy without a really strong public education system. And it has to be public because it's for everybody. I'm a big believer in traditional community public schools. I believe they anchor neighborhoods. I believe they contribute to your property value, which, if nothing else, that's a big reason to stay engaged as somebody who doesn't have children in the schools anymore. But for me, it's much bigger than that, and it is about community. I mean, John, I think, covered most of the stuff about work, quality of life, all that, but ultimately, nations that don't have strong public education systems available to everyone, the poor, women, minorities, all that, are dictatorships. So, we need to make sure that we have an educated electorate who understands why they need to be engaged. I do want to push back a little bit on one of John's statements.
I saw that coming.
And he's right, that we're 41st on these sort of these international tests, but I want to push back a little on that. It doesn't mean we don't have room for improvement. The United States has actually always tested behind a lot of the world on a lot of tests. We just have. We've always been behind China and some others. There are nations that are very good at math facts and rote memorization and all of that. Our nation, those countries are clamoring to get their kids into our schools because we teach critical thinking and entrepreneurship, innovation. That is still stuff that we need to lead on. And my concern with so many of the cuts that are happening are to exactly the programs that have separated us from the rest of the world right when we still need to be separate and distinguish ourselves that way. So China is clamoring to get their kids into our colleges because they know they need more of that. We don't have that quality. It is a uniquely American quality. We are risk takers. I talk to European friends, they're like, I would never do what you guys do, start a business and mortgage your house. And that is a uniquely American quality that comes through our school systems. So I don't want to lose that. So I worry that sometimes when we're comparing ourselves to all these nations, let's not lose what we're really good at. Now, those tests. Let's talk about those tests for just 1 minute because it's a really important factor. We test every child in this nation, including children that in other nations probably would be considered special ed. They are not testing those kids. We test the poor. We test everyone. Those nations are not educating those children, folks. So it is not an apples to apples comparison, and I push back every time on that. Finland knocks it out of the park. I love Finland. I wish we could have Finland's education system. Really, they're phenomenal. They have invested in it and made it just the gem that everybody wants to be. Folks, Finland is homogeneous, and they all look alike. They don't have nearly the same issues that we have as a nation, and they're tiny. Do you want to know who beat Finland on the national test? Massachusetts. Massachusetts beat Finland. That's more like apples to apples, right? They're probably about the same size. Guess who has the highest funding per student in the nation? Massachusetts. Thank you.
Well, there's not much more to that, but I know a lot of people today ask with me. A lot of people today say with me. Do you know what with me is? What's in it for me? What's in it for you is this. The better educated young people are and the more they make, the higher their per capita income, the more they're contributing to Social Security. So the more secure you are.
So I can see a growing pile of questions, but I'm just going to, there's a couple other questions on the initial that I think Ron can actually tee up and answer. Ron, there are two questions. I'm going to ask that you cover both of them. One is, what is the role of the KISD, Kent Intermediate School District? And then can you also explain the differences between traditional public schools, charter schools, and the new online academies?
I can. Kent ISD, the Intermediate School District is, in its structure here, is unique to Michigan, but it's not unique to the states, because virtually every state has some structure like this. And the purpose of the Intermediate District is to create economies of scale, so that everyone shares the burden of a cost that no individual school district should bear. In most states, that's limited primarily to special education. Here, we're very unique in special education because the Grand Rapids Public Schools actually was a pioneer in public education. We have, in special education. We really have a rich history, if someone cares about that, of being the special ed pioneers, if you will. And so Kent ISD doesn't actually provide special education like a lot of the intermediates across the state. We contract out to the Grand Rapids Public Schools because they created it. They're the best. So we have a little bit unique structure there. But bottom line, we create economies of scale. If you've ever been in in our Career Technical Center, we have opportunities for young people that are beyond comparison. We have a hangar out at the airport where young people in our high school programs are the only high school students in the nation who can earn an avionics electrician certification and walk right out of that program and into a $40,000 a year job because of the opportunities that we provide them. We have information technology programs where students who come to us from all 20 school districts can walk out of the tech center and into Davenport as sophomores with the college credit that they receive. We still have the residential construction programs, we still have HVAC, we have the state's leading culinary arts program. So there's a lot that we provide, and if any of you know anything about a commercial kitchen, it's expensive. None of our individual districts should have to bear the cost of a commercial kitchen except to feed their students, not to educate them. And if they have one, and they do, they're spending all their time feeding their students with it. So we take all of your tax dollars and share it among all 20 school districts. We also provide professional development assistance. We also provide, so teachers learn how to better teach at Kent ISD. And we also do collaborative programs. We run the HR departments and human resource departments for 5 or 6 or 7 of our districts. We run the information technology departments for another 4 or 5 of them. I provide communications services to all of the districts with the exception of Grand Rapids. And something I'm very proud of, and I'm not going to spend too much time on today, but when you go back to the table there where all the literature is, please take a magnet, a refrigerator magnet. You can all use another refrigerator magnet, right? Because you got grandkids and you got another picture you want to put up there. Please take a refrigerator magnet for School News Network, because we created that with you in mind. All of your grandchildren, nieces and nephews who are in the public schools, you know they're doing cool stuff, but you don't get a chance to go see it, right? School News Network covers what's happening in every one of our public schools, and we have people like Charles Honey and Tom Rademacher doing the reporting. Grab that refrigerator magnet and go on School News Network and see what your kids are learning in schools. I think you're going to be pretty surprised. Now, you also wanted to talk about charter schools. Let's go back to Proposal A. One of the things you did when you voted for Proposal A, and we all did, because our property taxes were way too high, as Elizabeth said. We had a property tax crisis, and I know about it because that's why I lost a job. I worked for Governor Blanchard at the time, and we made a couple half-hearted attempts to resolve the personal property tax problem. We didn't get it done, and a guy named John Engler drove around the state in his Oldsmobile, and he was handing out nickels, and he may have given you a nickel at one time, and he said, "There, that's all Jim Blanchard's going to do for you on your property taxes is a nickel." And so I lost my job as a result of that. And then they passed the property tax reform that we couldn't pass in 1993, and that was Proposal A. And what that did, when we sent all that money to Lansing and then we sent it back to the schools, was it gave us the opportunity to create a whole array of different schools that we couldn't afford before, because every dollar followed the child. They didn't send Grand Rapids back an allocation based on the 33,000 students it had at the time. They sent Grand Rapids, at that time, about $4,500 for every student who showed up at the door. And we at the ISD could count and verify that that student was there. And so, suddenly, they said, you're competing. It's good for everybody. If you compete, you're going to get better. Well, they also said that gave them the opportunity to create charter schools. So they created charter schools, and the idea was for charter schools to be innovative. For innovators like Maureen Slade, when she was a school administrator, to decide, you know what, I'm tired of being under the thumb of this administration. I'm going to go out on my own and I'm going to show them, darn it, that all the great things that I'm doing for special ed students will work for every population, and I'm going to have the best educated group in the city. That was a great dream. That was a really terrific vision. It didn't happen. What happened was corporations came in, they saw a profit opportunity, and they started a bunch of schools that really, with the exception of the buildings that they built, you know, our buildings are built to last, and they're required to be built to last. But with the exception of the buildings they built, which looked more like modular homes at the time, they hired retired administrators from all of our schools, and they put in all the tired programs that we were moving away from, and they took our students from our public schools, and they created choice, and the families who took that choice felt good about it. I'm not going to say that the families didn't feel good about that choice, and every family who made that choice feels as though they're doing the best thing for their child. But what happened is this. Grand Rapids, who at the time had 34,000 students, today has 17,000 and change. They lose students every year. They run the risk of starting next year with fewer dollars than they had this year. They're doing an incredible job of competing with the resources they have. We also created at the time schools of choice. And we said, you know, you shouldn't be, these government boundaries shouldn't limit your ability to go to the school of your choice. And so what happened then? Nice little elementaries like Aberdeen Elementary up on the north side closed, and the people go across Beltline to Collins Elementary in Forest Hills. Why do the taxpayers in Forest Hills pay for the, I don't know, but that's the way it is. And that's some of the things that it gave us. We do have some good charter schools. And in this state, we have a real strong, very, very strong charter school movement because my friends from the Blanchard administration who are in the Detroit area are desperate to create any opportunity they can possibly make for their children other than the Detroit public schools. And so they are working, anything would be better in their mind than what they had before. And so we have well-managed schools in this state, and we had some schools that were not so well-managed. You know, we might have had some excesses here, but there was never a time when our Grand Rapids school board members were being chauffeured to their board meetings. That's right. But that's what happened in Detroit, and that's what the excesses that happened in Detroit led to policies that hurt us all and continue to hurt us all. My opinion. You may feel otherwise, and please express it. Online.
Yeah, I'll touch on that. The big thing, too, that's very controversial with charter, some of you have heard the term creaming, like they take the cream from the top. So I can tell you right now, Grand Rapids Public has some very expensive children. They have very high special needs. They may cost up to $100,000 a year, and the district's getting maybe $15,000 a year total with all the different funding sources for that kid. So the charters don't take those kids, folks. They just don't. They're supposed to, but they don't. I have friends who've tried, and there's code words, but Grand Rapids would really be better suited for your child. So those kids are left behind. The other kind of, I'll just call it a scam, I'll call it out for what it is. They get the same amount per child that our public schools do, depending on where they're located. They get the same amount. They don't have to pay into the pension fund that we are mandated to pay into, which I absolutely love our retired teachers. We need to take care of them. But it is a mandatory expense that is now, I think, 27% of every payroll dollar in our district. The charter school down the road is getting basically the same amount per child. That's where they're making their profit, because they don't have to pay into that system. So, and the system was completely uncapped. They can expand without any regulation, no quality control. So at the same time, I'm attending hearings in Lansing that are all about quality and, accountability measures. They're allowing these charters, many of whom have profoundly failing records, to expand. So just by way of example, recently down the road was Egan Heights, which was taken over by a charter, they were taken over by the state and given to one of these charter school systems. They didn't make payroll, folks, a few weeks ago. So it's not, there isn't proof that they're being run any better. In fact, it's very opaque. There's these management companies. We're now really ground zero for the entire nation for the for-profit charter industry. 80% of the charters in Michigan are for-profit. So when you talk to friends from other states, like my friends in California, I have a friend who runs an environmental academy. That's that nonprofit, entrepreneurial, it's just a little standalone nonprofit. It's doing great work. That's what charters were supposed to be. That is not what they are here. I just want to make sure people understand that. And online. That's the other thing that was uncapped. We are using online education in our classrooms. So this notion that our public schools are not innovative and we're not using technology is just not true. In our district, we have world languages. We're a small district. East Grand Rapids has 3,000 students. We can't possibly offer every language, but we can through the use of online. So we have kids taking Mandarin and Arabic and all these other languages with a teacher supervising, and they're using an online model. So that is happening. What's happened is now, and this to me is just unbelievable, entities that don't have bricks and mortar, they don't have guidance counselors, they don't have parapros, they don't have, maybe 100-to-1 teacher ratio, they don't have buildings, they don't have pools, they don't have drama, art, music, gym, all the things that make school school. A child now can sit at home, collect their $7,000, their full student allotment, the same that goes to my district, can go to an online charter academy now. Maybe out of New York. Some of these places are making, millions of dollars a year now. Kids sitting at their home in front of computer screens, that same exact dollar amount is following that child to the online school. So, and I could live with that if it were less, because it costs a lot of money to run a school. And our guidance counselors, which are so critical in our district, we have a very high percentage of kids who go on to college and they need a lot of help with that, or they have emotional issues, or all the things that make school school. All the things we require schools to do now, those entities are not having to do. The other thing about the charter schools, most of them only go through 8th grade. You want to know why? High school is extremely expensive. So they don't do high school. They just don't do it. So, again, if it were a level playing field, when we want to talk about this free market with education, I will have that debate any day of the week. You can't stack it in favor of one entity. Everybody should have to go through high school. Everybody should have to pay into the pension fund. There should be at least the same rules, so we're at least having the same discussion. Okay, finally, 21F. This is a new law that just got passed through the budget process last year. This basically says that students can take up to 2 online classes a year. Districts have no control to say yes or no, from 5th grade through 12th. So, let me just give you a scenario. We have some pretty tough teachers in our high school. You know that teacher who taught you English? She was really hard. You worked hard, you got a C on your paper, but she changed your life. She's that one you fought for. She's the one you finally got that A, or maybe it was a B plus in my case, and I was thrilled because she was so hard. But to this day, I'll talk about how Mrs. Graham changed my life. She's the reason I ended up going to law school and doing pretty well. Now, some people now, they might be a very highly motivated student. They might not want Mrs. Graham because they're worried she's too hard to grade her. They now don't have to have Mrs. Graham. They can go down to the guidance office, say, I want to do online. And we cannot say no. So, and it shows up on the transcript almost like it's a class from our high school, depending on how it's coded. So this is the new reality, and that dollars, they follow the student again. So it's divided up again in an incremental amount. It's about the same cost if you were to take the child, there's 6 classes a day divided by 6. That same exact amount goes to that charter school now, or that online school. So that's now money getting pulled out of our district, which helps pay for our guidance counselors, helps pay for all that whole child education, which we all so desperately know our kids need. And that's my frustration.
So I'm kind of seeing a pattern here, Ron. She gets applauses, we don't. I think we should just turn the mic over and no.
All right, well, I'm going to start getting into some of the questions. And this question was about the ratio of teachers to children. It says it's a statement that they're out of control, that the teacher is essential to let severely handicapped students and to support them.
how can we address these student-to-teacher ratios? And actually, that's kind of a nice pickup from where we just were talking. In fact, Elizabeth referenced an example where with Grand Rapids Public Schools, we are privileged to serve the highest need students of the entire county. These are the most severely handicapped, disabled students, those center-based special education students. Well, federal law, as along with some state law, have mandated levels of services for children with special needs. That's true for center-based special education students. That's true for traditional special education students. That's true for English language learners, students whose native language is not English. The feds in the state say, thou shalt provide these services, and with that typically requires layering on support. With that means more people. Unfortunately, they only give you about 10 to 20 cents on the dollar to pay for it. So we have to be very creative in how we utilize the funding that comes to us, both these grant dollars for these enhanced services, but also the general fund dollars, the state per pupil. And the reality is, we are not sufficiently funded for those services. So the deck is already stacked against a district with a high needs, high poverty population of students. I'll give you an example. Grand Rapids Public Schools, 25% of our students are eligible for special ed services, and 25% are eligible for English language learner services. Our Hispanic Latino population just became our largest student population for the first time ever this year. Our Hispanic they make up about 36% of our student population, followed by African American at 34%, followed by Caucasian at about 22%. And so, but that means we have 50% of our student population that are high need students with mandated services that are not fully funded. So how do we make up for that? We have to look at class sizes. You don't have a lot of ways by which to shape the dollars to keep the class sizes as low as possible. We are a people-oriented service industry. And if you look at Grand Rapids Public Schools, again, in the last 10 years, we have cut, closed, consolidated, gone through nuclear-style negotiations with our teacher union. We have done everything possible to keep our budget balanced, to keep those class sizes as low as possible. We have done it. We've cut $100 million out of our budget in the last 10 years. $100 million. Eliminated 1,000 jobs, closed 30-plus schools. And proudly we will say we are one of the only urban districts in this state that saw our bond rating actually go from negative to stable in the midst of this last recession. We have been heralded as a model for one of the best run urban districts in the state and in the country. And we're very proud of that. We've had to make some extremely painful, difficult decisions in all of those cuts and closures. But in part, that's because of declining enrollment, this school choice, the new charters, the new online, this new so-called education playing field. And unfortunately, as we've had to make those tough cuts, we've had to look at class sizes. So the one easy way to begin to address the class size issue is our legislature really needs to start to reprioritize funding for our public schools. As you heard earlier, our funding levels have been cut back to 2004. You also have seen most recently under the Snyder administration, the K-12 budget at the state level has been rated, whereas some hundreds of millions of dollars have been rerouted to community colleges and universities. And so what you have here is just essentially an attack on our schools, an attack on that budget. And it does require investments. And it's not just spending, as some would like to say. These are smart, strategic investments to ensure that the students get the best teaching and learning. And we know that a smaller class size has a positive impact on students. It allows the teacher to do more differentiated learning, especially when you have a high needs population. You've got groups of students of 30, and they're all at different levels academically, depending on their subject area, depending on their student need. So it really does come down to dollars and cents if we really want to reduce those class sizes. I also think, frankly, that our funding formula in Michigan is just fundamentally broken. We are still living in these post-proposal A formula that's got this geopolitical distribution of funding, whereby a school in Mackinac Island gets $12,000 $12,000 per student, and in Grand Rapids Public we get $7,000, which doesn't make any sense. And it also doesn't, we do not fund education based on the needs of students. We know that it costs more to educate a high school student than it does an elementary student. We know it costs more to educate an English language learner than it does a traditional student. Yet, we do not account for that in any way, shape, or form. We do not fund on different levels to ensure that the adequate services are being provided. So each and every child, regardless of their age, their income, their ability, their native language, that they will reach that climate, they will reach that graduation point and graduate prepared and college ready. We don't do that. In fact, instead, we have just this one-size-fits-all formula. Well, not quite, but we basically, each school gets a single per pupil dollar amount, and that's it. And so districts, again, with high needs, high poverty, we actually have it stacked against us. Because we do make money like the charters do at the elementary level, but we use those savings to pay for the loss at the high school level and the loss with our English language learners. We estimate about 10% of every per pupil dollar we get from the state we use to fund special ed and English language learner services that are underfunded by the state and the feds. So we're, right off the bat, we're taking 10% to support the whole system, all children, not just Johnny or Jane who are in that one school, in that one classroom. So it does kind of come down to, and it's a long answer to the student-to-teacher ratio, but it's complex, and it really does come down to how are we going to ensure that the funding is there so that you have the right services, the smaller class sizes to support students. Is that, Michelle? Yep, okay. All right. Past several years have been standardized testing fiascos. Why not increase arts, phys ed, vocational ed classes? I get the feeling that Lansing is trying to destroy public education. How do you feel? I think we all agree. I'm going to go on. All right, good. It appears that our culture is increasingly selfish. Don't we need to care not just for the education of our own grandchildren, but the children of our culture who don't have grandparents? Absolutely. In fact, you know, I'm going to come back to those students, especially the more at-risk youth, the students that don't have a household with 2 parents and 4 grandparents and a whole level of supports with aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews there to support them. You have a lot of homes, especially those that are at risk, where they're broken families. They may not have a father. They may not have any grandparents. They may not have a mother who's checked in, so it's auntie or uncle or grandma who's taking care of that child. And so it really does take a village to raise a child, to support our children. And that's where you've heard my boss, and we would all say the same thing. We all have a stake in this. We all have to step up to the plate because our children need it. And in this day and age, you know, it's just needed now more than ever to wrap our arms around these children because they need those supports now more than ever.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. You know, I'm really pleased. Winnie Brinks was here earlier. Winnie chaired a group that I was part of in East Grand Rapids Schools. It's our legislative committee, where we work just to communicate with Lansing, all the stuff we're upset about. I'm regularly in Lansing talking to folks. And one of the things I'm really proud of that committee, it's existed for 20 years. For some of you know Andrea Heidel, back a long time ago, helped start the committee. But it's been around a long time. One of the things I'm most proud of that committee, we're in East Grand Rapids, right? We understand the dynamics in our district, very different than what's down the road in Grand Rapids. But I'm very proud of that committee because we are very, very focused on not just our district, but the whole. And so we work, I work really closely with John on talking about education policies and what's going to be good for everybody. Because I really believe if we bring the whole boat up, it's good for everybody. And that does lead to the notion, we are now expecting our schools to do more than ever. So some people think, how can it be that expensive? And just reading, writing, arithmetic. When I went to school, Ron already touched on the expectation that we're now preparing kids for careers that nobody could have fathomed. It's very expensive to prepare them for those careers. But on top of it all, I'm not going to read it, but this is an incredible document created by Jamie Bulmer, who's a huge education advocate. And it basically gives the laundry list by decade of what legally schools are required to do. The list, folks, it's hundreds of things now that are required by law that were maybe maybe 30 things when a lot of you are at school. So it's very long, and a lot of it is to address a lot of the stuff that John was talking about that these kids need. But folks, it costs money. It just costs money, and these kids do. I mean, it's expensive to bring a kid who literally just immigrated here and doesn't speak English in 4th grade up to speed. We are expecting our schools to do that, and my frustration is I've got legislators in Lansing telling me we've got to be accountable and, you know, ding a teacher who's that child's test score isn't high enough. Do you know those kids actually have to take the standardized tests? They don't speak English. I mean, seriously. I mean, is that just not the craziest thing ever? When we talk about comparing our test scores to the rest of the world, we're one of like the top nations in the world for immigration. So we've got this very diverse pool having to take those tests. So just keep that in mind.
Another round of applause, please. I'm going to give this one to Ron. I'm going to kind of try to merge 3 questions. You have one question about can we change our technology education system toward the European model that includes more tech ed in high school? And another question about should we require financial literacy like what they do in Rockford? And this talks about career internships, mentoring initiatives. What are schools kind of doing to that? And the last one, I actually just wanted a little bit more about Innovation High. So you can kind of merge all 3 of those.
I can, and thank you for the question. The European model, that too contributes to the testing issue because when we compare with them, the ones who are going to university are tested and the ones who are going to apprenticeship are not. So that gives the reason why our scores on the international tests are down near the Finland sheep herders. But actually, I was thinking of Lapland, actually. But in any event, we're working very hard, actually, with the business community on a couple of the things that you've mentioned there. Because we found a real barrier in our state and in terms of inspiring young people for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math careers. And in our area, when parents hear STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, everybody in our state has a family member who lost a job in manufacturing. You look at Greenville, where they used to make refrigerators, and then they were making solar panels. Well, what could be more high-tech than solar panels? Well, they lost all those jobs, right? So, if you said STEM in Cupertino, California, they'd be thinking about the next .com. And wow, this is terrific. So we need to do a better job of working with our employers to help young people understand, and all of you actually understand, what opportunities are available to them and inspire them to pursue those opportunities. Because what we found when we do more of that sort of tracking, is what it was called in your day, families resist that because we think we're pigeonholing their kids. And they also fear that I don't want my kid to be like Uncle Harold and lose his job. Or we all know that, manufacturing is cyclical. Well, it's different today, but we really have to work hard. We really have to engage business, and there have to be, sort of connections all the way through. John, remind me the other pieces of that question. Innovation High. Innovation High is something that we're really proud of, and we now have we have our first class has taken the Michigan Merit Exam this year, so we're 3 years into it. And Innovation High is a collaborative of all 20 of our school districts. Our superintendents, for about 2 years, probably longer, studied high school reform as a result of the new Michigan Merit curriculum requirements. And those new Michigan Merit curriculum requirements are not new now, but what they was every student has to take 4 years of math, including Algebra 2 Trig. Every student has to take 3 years of science, including physics and/or chemistry. Every student has to take 4 years of English, 3 years of social studies, 2 years of world language, and 1 online course. And for everybody, I can look around and say virtually everybody in this room is maybe a couple of young people in the back, that would have been considered a pre-engineering, pre-med sort of requirement when we were in school. But that's what every child has to take. And so when those standards were introduced, we as a superintendent's group studied what can we do to change the experience, because we know that we've not prepared every young person to take that kind of class. And so we created Innovation High, which is actually a problem-based learning or project-based learning. Every student is assigned from different schools. They all work together in teams of 4. They have a contract with each other on the project that they're doing. And they solve real-world projects that are assessed by businesses. Business people who are partners come in and say, yeah, that would work in our place, or no, it wouldn't. And so, it's a great experience for those 300 kids, but that's a byproduct of what it's about. It's about the more than 1,000 educators who've come through there in the last 2 years to learn how to bring that back to their school. Because that's what's important about it, that it benefit every kid in the county, not just the 300 who are assigned.
What do you think?
Well, I think we didn't get to all the questions. I think we've kind of roundabout answered some of them. So I know we're near the end here, and so Maureen, do I hand this over to you now? Yeah. All right. Well, let me just say thank you again for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. If you ever have questions, we're all very accessible. You can go to the ISD website, the GRPS website, and through Eastern Rapids and contact us. I know my cell phone is on my website.
Don't forget to take a magnet.
I'm very, very proud of my colleagues and can see that we work really hard for all of our kids, because whether they belong directly to you, they all belong to us. So thank you very much. Our meeting in May will be back in Meyer Gardens, and we hope to see all of you then. Thank you very much for being here.